Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Association Essentials series, and those that are joining us across the HOALiving network from Community Association Management, FCS Community Management, Idaho HOALiving, and A+ Accounting. I think we got a good presentation for you today. We are excited, so let's, before we get into the meat of the presentation, a couple of housekeeping items here. Just a reminder that if this is the first time joining us and you'd like to see future or past recordings, they are located on our HOALiving website under Training, Association Essentials Series, and then previous recordings. So you can see everything that we've done there. Some good information. If you missed something and want to go back and look at the recording, we'll have that up shortly. But that is there for a resource for board members. We want to thank our sponsor, Max Maintenance, for helping us put on this. If you have spring cleaning needs around your community, whatever it happens to be, cleaning up your clubhouse, your patio, exteriors, pools, that's all that fun stuff as we get ready to go into the summer season. Max is there to help with all your maintenance needs. They are currently running a spring special, so you can get 10% off whatever work you do with them. If you're interested in hiring them for some work, their contact information is there, and we are pleased to have them here down in St. George as well as all through the Wasatch Front. So take advantage of them. They're good guys. They do good work. Okay, so presentation for today. We are talking about running an effective board meeting, and our presenters today will be myself. I am Scott Anderson. I'm the Vice President of Community Management here at Community Association Management, a little bit of a tongue twister there, at CAM here in St. George. And we also have Neil Schiffman, who is a Senior Community Manager for FCS Community Management up on the Wasatch Front. And so we are super excited to give you some tips and tricks and hopefully give you something useful to make your board meetings run smoothly and run effectively. Neil, you're up, man.
Yeah, we all know that the board member's favorite thing that they get to do is run board meetings. And we know that those can sometimes be a little bit stressful, a little bit nerve-wracking. We want to go over a couple of options and things that you can use, tools that you can have in your tool belt to help you be as effective as possible as a board member at your board meetings. And typical to our office, we love to reference Parks and Rec because it seems like, oh my goodness, they have so many little tidbits and things that apply to our industry working with boards and communities. So we're going to watch a little bit of a video to kick us off and go over a couple of our favorite things that we want to avoid when we are doing a board meeting.
Okay, here we go. Thank you so much for coming. What an amazing turnout. My name is Leslie Nope. I am the Deputy Director of the Parks and Recreation Department. And tonight we're going to be taking some of your questions. Hello? We're having a meeting in here.
Does anybody have any questions about permits?
We don't need palaces. The ideas are what shine in our meetings.
What are you, some kind of moron? Why don't you have hand dryers in the park bathrooms? They're so much more sanitary than paper towels. Anyone knows that.
My dog went to one of your parks and ate another dog's feces, and I am going to sue you for that.
How do you like it? Huh?
No!
How do you like that? Now imagine you're holding coffee.
With the government shut down, who's going to stop Al-Qaeda?
One thing at a time. I don't like obscenities just as much as you don't like them.
No, it drives me crazy. I have kids.
Right.
So those are some some horror situations that sometimes HOAs and board meetings do run into with angry homeowners. We understand homeowners, another Parks and Rec quote, and this is not direct quote, but basically these homeowners who are upset and frustrated, they're carrying loudly at us, right? That they live in a house in an HOA. The board is managing that HOA, trying to do the best that they can on a volunteer basis. And we want to help diffuse some of those situations. So we want to focus on what are the tips, what are the tricks, what are the things you can do to have an effective board meeting. And it really does start before the board meeting even occurs with the preparation.
Right. So when we're looking at our meeting, are we setting ourselves up for success? So the success of our board meetings and the effectiveness of our board meetings happen long before the meeting actually gets started. So when we're looking at this, right? So questions to ask yourself when you're looking at your meeting: what does your meeting schedule look like? Do you have a realistic meeting schedule? Are you meeting frequent enough that you're getting business accomplished so you don't have to have marathon long meetings? Or are you meeting so often that you're just kind of there in habit, talking about whatever, and there's not enough to fill your agenda? What type of meeting are you having? Is it a special meeting, an annual meeting? Some of those are going to prepare a little bit different. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And when you're looking at your agenda, how far are you setting your agenda? Because that's going to affect some of the effectiveness of your meeting. And do you understand the role of each officer and board member, what role they have, as well as your association community manager in your board meeting? Because if we don't understand our roles, then we spend some time trying to figure that out during our board meetings. So Neil, what's the advantage of establishing a proper meeting schedule?
So one of my favorite emails to get when I know that the board has a meeting schedule, hey, we meet the fourth Thursday of every month. That fourth Thursday at 5 o'clock, an email comes through, hey, are we having a board meeting right now? When you have a regular schedule, it takes the guessing game out. It takes the issue of, oh, I forgot we had a meeting that night. It's on your calendar, you know it's coming, and you're ready and prepared for that. On the opposite end is, are you meeting because we meet on that fourth Thursday, every single Thursday, or every single month? Are you meeting just out of habit, or do you actually have the need for those board meetings to occur? And so determining the needs of your association, do you need to meet quarterly? Do you need to meet every month? Or is it something that, hey, you know what, we have the annual meeting in the fall and we're going to have a meeting in March or April, and that's going to be sufficient for that association? Those are decisions that you need to make with your manager to make sure that those meetings are occurring in a timely fashion and not just meeting because you have a set schedule.
Right. I think sometimes we get into the habit of that, of just meeting just because, and it turns into a little bit of a social hour, particularly coming out of COVID, right? We're all desperate for some human interaction. And so you just want to make sure that your meetings are for conducting business and doesn't turn into the community gossip fest there. So, but we do love this comment here with the board members. Sometimes this is how we feel, right? The large turnout at the meeting with like 4 homeowners there stresses us out and makes us a little bit nervous. But determine the type of meeting that you have. If today we're focusing primarily on board meetings, but some of these principles apply across the board. Your annual meeting preparation is going to be slightly different than your board meeting. If you have a special assessment, you're trying to pass a special assessment in your association and you have to call a special meeting for that purpose, that preparation is going to be a little bit different. Or if you have a special meeting for whatever reason. And so those are typically the 3 kind of meetings that we have. But for today, we're focusing primarily on board meetings to help you get that prepared. But if you understand what meeting you have, your preparation is going to look a little bit different. The other thing to think about is, Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, when you're prepared for the type of meeting that you're going to have, you're going to be able to navigate the questions that are going to come up. You're going to have a special meeting and you're talking about a new pet waste rule or a parking rule. You've prepared ahead of time so that you're ready to field those questions. You are able to navigate the frustrations when they're carrying loudly, the homeowners are carrying loudly at you, when you've prepared and you know what board meeting you're getting ready to attend.
Absolutely. One other thing to think about, right, we saw in the clip is homeowners sometimes come with some passion and with some ideas of how the association should run, and they would like to give us our input, right? One thing to think about is if you have a large turnout at your board meetings, or you're having, if you've determined that you may have a controversial subject come up at one of your board meetings, one thing to adopt or think about adopting as a standard policy for your association is how the open comment period for your board meetings are to be run, because sometimes they can get a little crazy, and we've allotted a certain amount of time for our board meeting, and an hour into your board meeting, you're still in the open comment period, and you're like, well, that's great, but we still have business to do. I'm glad that these people are okay. So here is a sample open comment period session resolution to give some guidance on how that functions. One of the things in the opening paragraph here that it talks about is homeowners are allotted time to speak during the open comment session, but should not expect to speak or be consulted on items listed on the meeting agenda. Sometimes board members fall into the trap of, hey, we need to consult with the homeowners in attendance and get their opinion on this thing. You are elected officials for your association. Your homeowners elected you to make a decision on how the association should run. And so there are business items that may warrant you to consult with and gauge where the audience is at, but that shouldn't be standard practice. And owners shouldn't expect to hold up the business of the association being transacted. And so if we have a resolution, everybody understands, hey, this is the time in your meeting that you are allowed to say whatever you want. So the board can know what's on your mind, and we can plan for future board meetings or future discussion topics. But once that open comment period is down, you're welcome to observe, you're welcome to see what's going on, but you shouldn't expect to be consulted. And so that's one thing to think through and make sure that you can tighten that up a little bit so the open comment period doesn't hijack your meeting. A couple other tips and tricks here. Oh, go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that you need to be confident as a board member. Owners are absolutely welcome to comment, to give feedback, but that feedback is just to be taken under advisement. The owners have elected you to serve as the board, to serve as the fiduciary for the association. You have responsibilities to take care of that association. So during this comment period, you need to be confident, you need to understand that, hey, they're carrying, again, loudly. Topic of the day is that they're very interested in their pet project or their issue. Maybe they recently had their vehicle towed and they're coming to yell at you because that's just not fair. Those things are taken under advisement, but the business of the board and the association is what the board meeting is for.
And that's absolutely correct. And that's further underscored in this resolution under point 8, right? So when somebody brings a comment or to the board, they shouldn't expect that issue be resolved at that very minute. Now, sometimes I say that, sometimes you can resolve that in that very minute, but sometimes they're like, no, we need to have the pool hours extended, or we need to redo the asphalt, we need to install a new pavilion, that sort of thing, right? And the board's reply should be, hey, thanks, we'll add it to a future agenda. item, we'll talk about it as a board in a future meeting, or we'll take that under advisement, or, hey, thank you for your comment. We'll get back to you at a later date on whatever that happens to be. But this is a real great tool to tighten that up and help so it doesn't hijack your meeting, and give owners time limits so you can cut them off and say, hey, we're not the Congress. You don't get to filibuster and hold up the meeting, right? And just drone on about whatever. But anyway, okay. So once you've sort of adopted this, or you've thought about how that's going to work, you're going to look at your agenda and set up your agenda the way that it really should be.
Yeah, and the agenda really is your guideline for the meeting. These are the business items that you are going to be discussing, that you're going to be voting on, that the association needs movement or action for. And our best practices advice is to have that agenda prepared 48 hours in advance. Gives board members an opportunity to review the agenda. What happens, Scott, when the agenda goes out 5 minutes before the meeting actually is held?
Oftentimes board members, and even sometimes the manager, not gonna lie, is surprised about some of the business items. And when you're surprised, you're trying to determine, hey, how do I feel about this thing? How do I feel about RV parking in my neighborhood? How do I feel about the number of clubhouse reservations and members allotted? Whatever that business item is, and you're trying to identify your position on this business item in the middle of the meeting, which then leads to comments like, hey, I'm just thinking out loud, I'm spitballing, and it's a little more, it's less directed, and the conversation tends to go out into the weeds a little bit on those sort of things. So if board members have the opportunity to look at the agenda items, formulate their own thoughts, those conversations can really be tightened down because they've had the opportunity to formulate their own thoughts or own opinions on how the association should address those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So along with the agenda being sent a couple days in advance, board members are going to take the time, they're going to review the agenda. And then if there's something missing or something that needs to be added or even something that needs to be taken off, those adjustments can be made so that you're not having to make all of these agenda additions as the meeting. Oh, my item on pet waste didn't get considered. It's not on the agenda. We need to add that. And so everybody's writing that in, or you're updating it virtually in our virtual format these days. That's just not as effective as the board can be. Getting that agenda out, reviewing it, and taking the time to make those business items impactful and meaningful for you. You're getting ready to vote on something. You're getting ready to vote on a contract. You're getting ready to vote on some kind of new policy or a resolution. If you're just coming to the meeting thinking about parking for the very first time, you're going to have a real hard time effectively making your points and your thoughts heard and understood. So please, pretty please, take that time, review those agendas early, and get those changes in for your manager. It's a little bit different these days because we are, for the most part, meeting virtually. So when you get that phone call on the way to your meeting saying, hey, can we add this item to the agenda? Sorry, the packet's already been printed. I can make that change on the virtual, Word document or PDF that we're going to be reviewing and looking at. But the manager may not be prepared to present. You're going to ask for some kind of report potentially. Getting those items on the agenda for the business item really is going to help with your effectiveness and having that function as well as possible. The other thing to focus on and remember is, what are the roles of the various board members?
So, right, and because every participant in the board meeting has a specific role to play, including your association manager. We didn't put it on here, but your president, what is your president really supposed to do? The president calls the meeting to order and makes sure that the meeting is moving, that there's proper pacing to the meeting, that the discussion items aren't stalling out and just letting it flounder and kind of go wherever. Keeping people on task is really what the president there is for, is driving the meeting forward so it doesn't drag out longer than it needs to be. The vice president is there to leave in case the president isn't there, but most of the time the president's there, and so they get to just sit back a little bit there. The secretary, your secretary is keeping a record of what is happening in the meeting. They're keeping the minutes. Oftentimes, the president, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if there's a time limit that they want, that the chair, your president, or whoever's leading your meeting wants to set, they allow or they delegate to the secretary to be the timekeeper to keep that on pace to make sure that we're going. And we're going to talk about a timed agenda here in just a minute. And then your treasurer is really looking at the finances and making sure that they're giving a financial report. But Neil, like, having a strong president in your meeting, how is that beneficial for you as a manager?
Yeah, so when the president is really directing the conversation, utilizing that agenda as a tool, it's going to help the meeting run more effectively. A lot of questions come up. Can the president vote? Can the president call for a motion? Can the president make a motion? So the president absolutely should be voting unless you're governing documents, and there are some documents out there that do prohibit a president.
Hey, you're cutting out there a little bit, Neil. In and out, your sound's cutting in and out a little bit. But right, so the president, he's making sure that the conversation keeps going. No, if you want to continue.
Yeah, is that any better?
No.
Still terrible.
You might need to reconnect. Oh, good. Good. Well, I don't know. I think it's only affecting certain people. Some people are saying they hear you fine. So continue. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize, everyone. Yeah, so that president being there to help run the meeting, that doesn't mean they can't vote. That doesn't mean that they can't call for a motion, but that's what they're there for. The vice president is there to help the president with that running of the meeting. And the secretary and the treasurer, their jobs are incredibly important. The minutes, having a conversation saying, hey, who's taking the minutes at this meeting, shouldn't be had at the meeting. When you're reviewing that agenda and you're the secretary and you're not going to be there, you need to ask one of the other board members to take the minutes. And those minutes are the decisions that are had during the meeting.
Awesome. So once we understand, we've set our meeting up, we've set ourselves up for success. Going into the meeting, we've relieved some of our stress. Let's look about what we do during the meeting, how we can keep things, set our meeting up for success, or keep that success moving as we go through. There's a good question here. What is our suggestion on getting board members to fulfill their duties? I think, personally, I have a conversation offline with my president. If I understand, hey, I really need you to step up and lead the meeting, have that conversation offline so it's not confrontational, it's not weird. But if you need some help, let me know. I'm happy to step in and get that taken care of. Neil, other suggestions?
Yeah.
If people are being passive on their duties?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually just recently had this conversation with a board. They were struggling with a treasurer who wasn't really reviewing the financials and couldn't speak to them during a meeting, and a secretary was not keeping effective minutes. And so the president and I spoke offline. We had a conversation about how this was affecting the association, what things were missing, what things were being really falling through the cracks because of these missing functioning board members. And so we did a training as part of the board meeting. We discussed about what each person's roles were. We discussed why it's important. Because I think a lot of times what ends up happening is they either don't understand that they have the ability to read the financials, to take the minutes, to, a president, right? Oh, I'm nervous about running a meeting. Great. Let's have some training. Let's go over what those roles look like and what those actually mean so that you can feel confident in accomplishing that task. And I think that is incredibly helpful. Hopefully, Valentina, that helped answer that question. So during the meeting, you want to be focusing on what you've got going on. What are the rules of the meeting? Where's the agenda? Where are you at on the agenda? What's happening with the minutes? Who's taking the minutes? And what are the action items that are the task list from now until the next board meeting?
So we all say, right? So we all are looking at the rules. We're looking at how meetings are supposed to be run. We all sort of default and say, oh, Robert's rules, right? We follow Robert's rules. And so we need to set the expectations of what that actually means, because if you want some light reading, Robert's Rules of Order is a fantastic book. I think it's only like, I don't know, something like 1,500 pages or something if you want to get into it. But, right, we all, boards follow that to some degree, and there's different versions of it, but understand how you're doing your meeting. Understand, hey, who's calling for motions, who's voting for motions, who can speak, when they're allowed to speak, that sort of thing. If you're more laid back, which a lot of boards are, they're like, we don't really need that. You may want to at least think about structuring that a little bit, because it'll drive the conversations a little bit better, and it'll cut down on like, oh, hey, who's supposed to be calling for a motion? Who's supposed to be doing some of this? So if you understand those expectations going into the meeting, it's easier to push the meeting forward and make sure that your business is being transacted.
Yeah, so before we hop over to the next slide, another question came in. Why would management not take the minutes? Why is that a duty that's assigned to the secretary? I think the biggest thing is the manager a lot of time is helping field questions. They are giving reports. Typically, the manager is reading through the financials. The manager is helping field owner questions that come up because they're involved in the day-to-day. And so it's really helpful when somebody who's not necessarily responsible for all of those tasks to keep the minutes. But if that's something that an association really, really wants, to have management take those minutes, then we just need to make sure that we have somebody else there who can help take those minutes and make sure that those minutes are going to be effective. Any other thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like oftentimes I've sat in meetings and they ask a question where I have to look at the governing documents, and I'm looking at the governing documents and trying to interpret what's happening. And so I'm focused on looking for that specific section in the governing documents, reading through it, interpreting it, and I may be missing conversation that's happening outside of what I'm focused on at that minute. And so I'll miss sections of the meeting and can't put it in the minutes. And so really the manager's job is to give counsel and work with the board to arrive at the best decision, interpret your governing documents, that sort of thing. And so they're not really in a position to capture all the discussion that's happening during the meeting and make sure that it gets written down correctly. And so if there's not someone there that can take the minutes, we can make those arrangements and bring somebody that can do that.
Yeah.
Lori, we'll get to your question here in just a second about who should make a motion. But we want to talk about your agenda, setting your agenda up for success, right? One of the tools that we have is we have a timed agenda. Two things that I always like to do to make sure that that we can keep proper pacing to a meeting, and Neil mentioned it earlier, is your agenda is just sort of a guide to help you with your meeting. I always recommend putting an end time to your meeting. Start and an end time to your meeting, that you're allocating a certain amount of time. Obviously, sometimes we may go longer, but it signals to everybody on the board, hey, we have this amount of time to accomplish the work. the business that needs to be done in your association. And so we're not leaving it open-ended to, hey, whenever we get done. We're saying, hey, we're going to constrain the time down to 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever that happens to be. And that way you can, again, keep people on task, because we're like, hey, we got 90 minutes to get all this done. We don't have 4 hours. We don't have 6 hours to get all this done. And so putting an end time on your agenda signals to everybody, hey, we got to keep this going and let's not drag it out. The other thing I like to do is to put time limits on, or like set a time, hey, we want to be on this agenda item by this time. Now, before your meeting, you may be guessing on, hey, like on this sample agenda, we have rule adoption, about 15 minutes for this violation policy. That may warrant more discussion as you get into the meeting, but at least you've allotted a certain amount of time, and you can say, hey, we're going to gauge our meeting based on this, just to make sure that we're moving and we can get through what we need to do. The other thing to look for is when you're assigning topics to your boards, make sure that they know about it, that it's not a surprise. Hey, your landscaping committee is supposed to be giving us a landscaping report. Your treasurer is going to be looking at this. Who's talking about what? And that way you're like, hey, you're coming up on the agenda. They can see their name on the agenda. They're coming up. They're prepared, ready to go, ready to present. And list your, I don't think we have it on here, but list your most important discussion items first on your agenda during your business. Once you get through calling the meeting to order, financial, all that stuff, list your most important stuff first, because if you reach your 90-minute cap and you're like, hey, people got to tap out, we can table the rest of the items or take those offline. If they don't warrant discussion during your meeting, you can address those via email. Neil,
yeah, absolutely. You know, you don't have to tie yourself into these times, but it's to remind yourself, hey, we've got other things to discuss, and we don't need to just be caught up in the rule adoption or the landscaping report, something like that. We're really frustrated with the landscaping. Sadly, Utah is in another drought this year, and my goodness, when are they going to turn those sprinklers on? Get that it's frustrating, but we really only allotted 10 minutes for all of these reports to be gone through. Let's take those frustrations offline. Let's discuss some different options that we can use to bring forward at the next board meeting. So Lori, we're getting ready to answer your question on calling for a motion. A lot of times these conversations stall or they start to get circular. A homeowner posts on Facebook and starts giving out some misinformation, something that's got you really riled up, and those conversations just keep going and going and going. Who can call for a motion? Anybody there can call for a motion. That does not just have to be the president. Typically, it is the president, but it can be anybody. If you're seeing that the conversation's not being moved forward, hey, is there a motion on the pet policy? Is there a motion on the parking policy? Is there more conversation that needs to be had? Because maybe it is justifiable that, hey, we're taking an entire half an hour on this, then that's great. But keep reminding everyone, hey, is there a motion there? Then the next question is, who can actually make that motion? Who is responsible to make a motion? The board members. That's not a homeowner responsibility, that's a board member. And then again, who is voting on that motion? Unless your governing documents specifically prohibit your president from voting, all board members in attendance should be voting. That is our recommendation for best practices for those voting.
Especially if you don't have the full board in attendance, if you have a couple members missing out, like having the president not vote sometimes puts the board in a weird position. And so if your board members are there during the vote, anybody who's there, it should be voting on the motion, whatever business is being voted on. Everybody there should voice their opinion, because again, nobody has any more power than anybody else. The president's really just there to drive the meeting forward, make sure there's topic, and like Neil said, generally defaults to the president to call for a motion during whatever they deem to be a lull in the conversation, or you're starting to get circular.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next topic that we want to talk about is minutes. What makes up good minutes? I think the key to focus on here is that the minutes are the decisions that were made. It does not need to be a verbatim written down record of every discussion item or every homeowner comment. These minutes should be the decisions that are made. A lot of boards will use their agenda and just comment to the side. You know, they have it written in a Word doc and okay, so the pet policy was unanimously approved by the board, or it was approved. When you're taking your minutes, unless specifically requested, we would recommend not listing all of the board members who voted one way or another. And there are absolutely instances where that is appropriate. It's a controversial topic. It's something where I very passionately feel that the board and the association should not be making the decision they are. I want it known that I voted against a motion. Great, we can put that in the minutes. But typically the board should be a unified front. The board passed the motion. Even if it wasn't unanimous, it just needs to be noted that the motion was passed. Because once that decision has been made, you're all on board as a unified front.
Correct, right? I think sometimes we fall into the habit of saying, hey, you know, if you voted one way, then you should be known. But, you know, that sort of lends itself to some divisiveness amongst the board or even amongst the association, that they're like, hey, that's my champion because they voted a certain way. But the board being a unified front in what they do in the decisions and the opportunities that they take in the association is key to the success of your association, is making sure put a unified front and a unified message when a decision is made. The other thing that we see a lot of is everybody tries to say, oh, hey, this is everything that happened in the meeting. Your meetings really are, the decisions were made, this item was voted on, this passed, this didn't, this was tabled till next meeting. We don't need, or you shouldn't, because it can get you into trouble if you put the wrong thing down. But it shouldn't be, hey, Sally said this, Johnny suggested whatever, right? Like, keep that stuff out. If you have homeowner comments, you can say, hey, the board discussed this thing. So there's a question. Do you have to state in the minutes the name of the person who motioned and seconded? You don't have to. There are a lot of associations that do, but you don't have to specifically mention that. If that's the operating procedure that your association wants to adopt, then we can certainly do it, but there's nothing that says that has to be done that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So another note on minutes, the minutes are the record of the association's decisions. And so you're reviewing those minutes. The board meeting occurred last month, and you're reviewing, yep, everything that's written down here is correct. There's no changes. An actual motion to approve or accept the minutes is not needed. If you've been doing it, rock and roll, of course that's acceptable. But if there's no changes, those minutes are approved and ready to be posted for owners to see. The other thing that minutes are really useful for is for tracking task items, things that need to be done before the next board meeting.
So as soon as possible after your meeting, within 24 to 48 hours is our recommendation. Sometimes that's not possible, especially if you're meeting on like a Friday, right? Get us to us the first of next week. But making sure, get that out so people know what they're responsible for, that they know what assignments were made, and that they may need to report on during the next meeting. But when we're making assignments, we need to use realistic timeframes. if you're getting a bid, unfortunately, in today's sort of world of Utah, of how construction and the way vendors are going, getting a bid in like 3 weeks for any sort of construction thing, probably not realistic. So we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about some of these things, and we're like, hey, we want to get this done by whatever date. We need to make sure that that's a realistic time frame. And sometimes we talk about something in March, but it's not actually due until June. Like, that's when we want to have that done, is June. We can put it on the agenda to say, hey, where are we at? Progress report on this. But at the same time, right, like, use those realistic time frames to schedule stuff out, because if you're meeting monthly, by the time you come around, there's only about 20 working days between meetings. And depending on what is going on or what you're asking, that's not a lot of time to be able to accomplish some stuff. If you have a wish list, the board has a wish list of 20 items, managers may ask you, hey, which of these 20 are your top 3 that you want me to have done in time for the next meeting? And that's what I'll focus on, and then we'll systematically work through all the rest of these things, right? So we need to just be realistic about the time frame and what we're asking as we move through, and that will eliminate a lot of the frustration in managing everybody's expectations as we go through some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you've had an awesome board meeting. Everything went according to plan. Homeowners participated and didn't care too loudly. They didn't scream at you. They didn't throw a shoe. Everything went swimmingly. What's next?
Your homeowners were not caring quite as loudly, right? They actually had a conversation with you, right? So, after your meeting, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, get those meeting minutes out for board members to review as quickly as possible. Don't forget what decisions were made. If you can, keep the minutes as you're going, so you can get those out for review as it's fresh on everybody's mind. So you're not scratching your head saying, oh, what was the decision on the landscape contractor? Which of the vendors did we pick? Get that information in those minutes and out for the board to review as quickly as possible. The other thing that we really like to do is, once those meeting minutes are approved, get those out on the association's website so that owners can see, and you have a transparent board of what decisions were made and what conversations were had and what needs to be done.
Because, right, we're talking about communicating with the owners. That's the number one complaint that as management we sort of hear from homeowners. They're like, I don't know what our board is doing. We don't know anything that's going on. But we're talking about communicating. So if we're effectively communicating amongst ourselves as board members about what those expectations are, what was assigned, what the manager is supposed to do, what me as a board member is supposed to do, then we can communicate that out to homeowners. One thing to keep in mind, or to underscore sort of this point, is that from a homeowner perspective, oftentimes the only time that associations are communicating with an owner is either 1, pay me money, or 2, you violated a rule, right? So if we think of it in those terms, we're only communicating a very negative sort of perspective on what's happening in your board meetings and in your association. Boards should take the opportunity to brag about whatever's happening. So know what your owner communication preferences are. If it makes sense for your association to do a newsletter, I'm not suggesting monthly because that is burdensome and nobody's got time for that. But, like, communicate out on a fairly regular schedule, whether that's quarterly or whatever that happens to be. If you have blast emails are super easy if you have a very targeted message that you want to send out to your homeowners. But brag about whatever's going on, the tree trimming project that's going on, the asphalt project that's going to happen on this date. So people know, hey, the board is actually working on my behalf and they're keeping my best interest in mind. And when we're talking about how to communicate, make sure that it's a positive spin, right? That we're saying, hey, the clubhouse is available for use. Please, when you use it, please keep these rules in mind. Instead of, hey, we've had a ton of issues in the clubhouse. Please, we've had vandalism in the clubhouse. These are the rules. We're sort of checking the cameras, we're checking key fob entrances, that sort of thing, right? Like, and there are instances for those more heavy-handed messages, but on the whole, and a rule of thumb is to try to keep those light and positive to build community within our association and brag about what you do because you work hard. It's a thankless job. You work hard for your association, and just make sure that you can communicate that out to owners so they know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Really effective boards are communicating regularly, whatever that looks like for your association, and every association is different. It doesn't necessarily have to be monthly or even quarterly. But communicate the projects that are being done, communicate what's happening, give updates, give status reports. Those are really great tools that the board can use to help the board meetings run efficiently and effectively so that homeowners are not coming in raging and upset about a project. Use that communication to solicit committee participation, to solicit just eyes and ears in the association. You know, the landscaper is out and there's a couple hundred homes in your association. There's no way for the board to really check whether the job and scope of work is being done correctly. Solicit those owners in a newsletter. Hey, landscapers are here on Wednesdays. Let us know if there's ever any issues so we can follow up and keep those landscapers accountable. That's a really great way to help. It doesn't seem like it's a board member or a board meeting specific topic, but it really does help those board meetings be as effective as possible. If you have that feedback from those owners to bring up and you're already prepared, I already know that landscaping is a hot topic this month, so I'm going to have some talking points as a board member to discuss. Hey, we've already given some feedback to the landscaper. Here's where they're going to address, and they expect that those lawns are going to green up in 3 weeks or something like that. Those are really great tools to have.
And using this communication piece in conjunction with your open forum at the beginning of the meeting, those two are really key or can be tools for driving future agendas and future business items for your association. So opening up communication channels on what's going on in your association can really limit the amount of frustration that's in your association, understand what people are doing and concerned about, and so you can make a effective decision for how your association is so it can move forward or is supposed to move forward. So Valentina asked us again, would you include renters in the communication channels? I think it depends on what you're communicating about, is my personal opinion. Sometimes that they are, they should be included. Like if they're using the recreational facilities and you have some communications about the recreational facilities, then yes, it does make sense to do that. Sometimes not so much. Obviously, if you're talking about official like meeting notices and that sort of thing, not. And so look at what you're communicating about, and sometimes it makes sense. If you can add them to an email list, obviously that's a lot easier. If you have to mail them something, then that gets a little bit more complicated. But if you have like, I know there are some associations that, I'm about to say a 4-letter word, have a social media page or social media channels. If you do that, you can add the renters to that way, and it's a really easy way to communicate to them that way as well. But social media can be another topic to talk about because there's some pitfalls there, but you can leverage those into your communication channels as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to focus on one of the purposes of a community association is to build community. Just because a renter is there does not mean that they are not part of the community and shouldn't be participating in those things. So is this a community communication or is this an association communication? You don't need to send an assessment notice to a renter. But if you've got a policy about using the amenities, using the common area, something like that, you should be sending that out to the renters as well. Absolutely. Well,
Great question.
we very much appreciate everybody's participation today. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer those. You can put them up in chat and we'll get those answered. But we do want to remind everyone, our next Association Essentials series is going to focus on Ingenuity at Work and Waste Focus, which is a vendor that helps with waste management services for private waste management in HOAs.
Let's see here. Lori put out, can you please send out notes on what we talked about today? So the recording will be up. We'll have to get with our team and figure out how they do that, but I'm sure we can get something to you, Lori, on sort of the highlights of what we talked about today, for sure. Other questions? We got a few more minutes as we wrap up. Let's see here. So look, the slides are going to be posted to HOALiving.com, AES, Lori, so you can find it there. Anthony asks, are social media pages productive? Again, I sort of stepped in it and I knew I was going to, but it depends on how they work, right? Like, so there are some things that you need to do. Similar to a board meeting, you need to set your social media channels up for success. This probably is a really good topic to talk about at a future event, but you really should have a social media policy on how the board is going to run your social media channels, how you're going to moderate that, make sure that they are productive and don't turn into like a hive nest of people just sort of complaining about whatever and mob mentality. But they can be productive. I know Neil has an association that uses a Facebook page. They've sort of set it up to where the residents can't comment. It's just to get information out. And they've really limited down, but for them, it works really well. And so we can talk about that at a future event. But the key point I want to make is that the association doesn't have an official social media channel. Chances are a homeowner has set one up, and that may or may not lead to confusion depending on how that one works. And so at the very least, you should at least talk about it and be aware of whatever social media is happening within your community so you can figure out how to best leverage those.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one of the questions asked, how do you handle owners wanting to change a management company but are not willing to do any work on the board? Again, this comes down to the confidence in your fiduciary responsibility for your association as a board member. If you feel the need to make a management change, that's absolutely something that you are welcome to address and look at. And you can solicit those homeowners and say, hey, look, you want to get a new management company, get us some bids, get us some proposals. We're happy to review that. But that's something that you're responsible for as a board. You are authorized to contract with management, and that's a decision that you get to make. Are there any other questions?
It's the same with any other vendor, right? Like your landscaping vendor. Everybody has an opinion on who should do what and what it should be, how much it should cost, right? And you as the board get to drive that decision and say, hey, if you want an opportunity to influence this decision, we welcome you on the board to help out. And oftentimes that's sort of how you can change people's minds. But again, to Neil's point, right? Be confident as a board member and say, hey, this is what we feel is best for our association at this time. You're welcome to get on the board, and when you're on the board, you can make a decision differently if you feel that that's what needs to happen.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any other questions coming in. So again, we very much thank you. This has been great to have a conversation about running effective board meetings and really adding some tools to your toolkit to help you run these meetings as effectively and efficiently as possible. So thank you again, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you. Hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully your meetings will go better or go well always, but we will see you next month.